Dearest reader, it has been said that London in the season is a theatre of the grandest proportions, where every drawing room is a stage, every ballroom a battlefield, and every whispered word behind a painted fan a weapon sharper than any gentleman's rapier. And yet, in all my years of faithful correspondence with you, my most trusted and discerning confidants, I confess that the events of this past Tuesday have left even this author quite breathless. Not from scandal alone, though there was scandal aplenty. No, dear reader. What stole the air from my lungs was something far rarer in our gilded world. A moment of unguarded, magnificent truth. But I am getting ahead of myself. Allow me, as is my custom, to begin at the beginning. And the beginning, as these things so often do, starts with mud. The morning of the 23rd of May dawned gray and sullen over Mayfair, the sky the color of old pewter, as though the heavens themselves were in mourning for the social sins about to be committed below. A light but persistent rain had fallen through the night, transforming the paths of Hyde Park into ribbons of treacherous, sucking mud. The sort that clings to the hems of muslin gowns with the tenacity of a desperate debutante clinging to the arm of a duke. It was, in short, the very worst morning for a promenade. And yet, promenade they did, for the season waits for no weather, and to be absent from the park on a Tuesday morning is to invite the sort of speculation that no amount of smelling salts can remedy. Among the parade of silk parasols and polished riding boots, one figure drew the eye not for her ostentation, but for a quality altogether more luminous. Lady Selene Ashworth, eldest daughter of the Earl of Pemberton, moved along the path with the unhurried grace of a woman who has never once checked her reflection in a shop window, not because she is unaware of her beauty, dear reader, but because she has never thought it the most interesting thing about herself. And what a beauty it was! Lady Selene's skin was the deep, burnished brown of mahogany polished by generations of careful hands, smooth and radiant even beneath the morning's ashen light. Her cheekbones sat high and proud, as though sculpted by an artist who understood that elegance is not delicacy but structure. Her eyes, large and dark and fringed with lashes that curled like calligraphy, held a warmth that the Ton found deeply suspicious. Her hair, oh, her hair, was arranged that morning in a crown of intricate twists and coils, each one pinned with tiny seed pearls that caught the meager light and threw it back as though she carried her own private constellation. She wore a walking dress of pale lavender muslin, trimmed at the bodice with ivory lace, and a pelisse of deeper plum that made her dark skin glow like embers banked for the evening. She was, by any honest accounting, magnificent. The Ton, however, had long ago decided that Lady Selene was something far less convenient. She was kind, not the performative kindness of the drawing-room, where a lady might inquire after your health while cataloguing the deficiencies of your gown, not the charitable kindness that manifests in annual subscriptions to worthy causes and an appearance at the Foundling Hospital ball. No, Lady Selene possessed the deeply inconvenient sort of kindness, the kind that compels a person to act, to reach out, to cross invisible lines that polite society has spent centuries drawing in the dirt. She speaks to shopkeepers, Lady Featherington had whispered to Mrs. Drummond Burrell at last week's assembly, her voice dripping with the sort of horror one might reserve for the discovery of a mouse in one's soup, not merely to place orders, but to inquire after their children. Their children, Mrs. Drummond Burrell. It is the Pemberton softness, Mrs. Drummond Burrell had replied, adjusting her turban with the practiced hand of a woman who had been adjusting turbans and reputations for 3 decades. Her mother was the same, all warmth and no strategy. It is a wonder the family maintains its position at all. But maintain it they did, for the Earl of Pemberton was both wealthy and well-connected, and his coffers had a way of silencing the sharpest tongues. Still, Lady Selene's refusal to observe the delicate choreography of social hierarchy, who one may acknowledge, who one must cut, who one pretends not to see, was a source of perpetual consternation to those who had devoted their lives to the mastery of precisely these arts. Which brings us at last to the mud. It happened just past the Serpentine, where the path curves beneath a stand of ancient oaks. Lady Selene was walking with her maid, Dorothea, a sensible woman of middle years whose primary talent was the ability to project an aura of profound disapproval without moving a single muscle of her face. When the commotion ahead drew their attention, a man had fallen. He lay half in the path and half in the churned earth beside it, his traveling coat, once fine, now liberally decorated with the brown paste of London's finest mud, twisted beneath him. His hat had rolled some yards away. His valise had burst open, scattering papers that were rapidly becoming one with the puddle. He was attempting, with the concentrated dignity of a man who knows he is being observed, to rise. He was not succeeding. Around him, the morning promenade continued its stately march with the determined blindness of a society that has elevated the art of not seeing to a philosophical discipline. Ladies turned their heads. Gentlemen steered their horses to the far side of the path. A cluster of young bucks, Lord Ashford, Mr. Finchhatton, and the Honourable George Crawley, that inseparable trio of waistcoats and witlessness, actually laughed. The sound carried across the damp morning air like the braying of particularly well-dressed donkeys. "Good Lord," drawled Lord Ashford, adjusting his cravat with fingers that had never once been soiled by honest labor. "Is that a man or a garden feature? I cannot tell where the mud ends and the creature begins." Mr. Finchhatton sniggered. The Honourable George Crawley guffawed. It was, by the standards of their set, the very pinnacle of repartee. The fallen man was not young, nor was he old. His skin was a rich, deep umber, darker even than Lady Selene's, and though his face was partially obscured by mud and by the obvious effort of maintaining his composure, there was something in the set of his jaw and the breadth of his shoulders that suggested a man more accustomed to commanding respect than receiving pity. He wore no visible crest, no signet ring that the gawkers could discern. His clothes, beneath the mud, appeared to be of good quality but entirely without the peacock embellishments that marked a man of fashion. He was, to the practiced eye of the ton, a nobody, and in the lexicon of London society, there is no creature more invisible than a nobody covered in mud. Lady Selene stopped. Dorothea, who had served the Ashworth family for 15 years, and could read her mistress's intentions the way a sailor reads the wind, sighed. It was a sigh of ancient, bone-deep resignation, the sigh of a woman who has long since accepted that her mistress will always choose the difficult path, and that she, Dorothea, will always be trudging along behind her, holding the hem. "My lady," Dorothea said, in a tone that managed to compress an entire sermon on propriety into 2 words. "I see him, Dorothea." "As do I, my lady." "As do we all." And yet, curiously, no one else appears to find this observation actionable. But Lady Selene was already moving. She stepped off the path and into the mud with the decisive stride of a woman who has weighed the cost of a ruined hem against the cost of her own conscience, and found the arithmetic quite simple. The lavender muslin darkened instantly, the pale fabric drinking in the brown earth like blotting paper. Behind her, she could hear the collective intake of breath that is the ton's version of a gasp, sharp, controlled, and pregnant with future gossip. "Sir," she said, extending her gloved hand. Her voice was clear and warm, pitched not with pity but with the matter-of-fact courtesy one extends to any fellow creature in difficulty. "You seem to be at a disadvantage. May I offer my assistance?" The man looked up. For a moment, and it was only a moment, but this author has built a career on the significance of moments, something shifted in his dark eyes. Surprise, certainly, and something else. Something that, had I been close enough to name it, I might have called recognition. Not of her face, dear reader, but of her character. "You are kind, madam," he said. His voice was deep, roughened by travel and by something less easily defined. The weariness, perhaps, of a man who has been too long away from home and has returned to find it exactly as he left it. "But I fear I shall ruin your gloves." "Gloves?" said Lady Selene, with a smile that contained more genuine warmth than all the chandeliers in all the ballrooms in Mayfair. "Are replaceable, sir. Decency, I find, is less easily mended once it has been neglected." She grasped his hand and pulled. Dorothea, abandoning her post of disapproval with the efficiency of a soldier answering a call to arms, moved to the man's other side and added her own considerable strength. Between the two of them, they hauled the stranger to his feet. He was tall, taller than he had appeared on the ground, which is often the way with men of true stature. They seemed to unfold. Standing, he was well over 6 feet, with the powerful build of a man who has spent more of his life on horseback or on the deck of a ship than in the cushioned comfort of a London club. Mud clung to him like a second skin, but beneath it one could discern the sharp lines of a face that was, by any measure, arresting. Strong brow, aquiline nose, full lips set in a line that hovered between gratitude and something far more guarded. "I am in your debt," he said, with a bow that was, given the circumstances, remarkably correct. "More than you know. You owe me nothing, sir. I would hope that any person of feeling would do the same." A shadow of something, amusement, sorrow, crossed his features. "You would hope," he repeated quietly. "Yes, one does hope." He retrieved his hat, gathered what remained of his scattered papers, and with another bow, this one deeper, more deliberate, as though committing her face to memory, he turned and made his way toward the gate, trailing mud and mystery in equal measure. Lady Selene watched him go. Dorothea watched Lady Selene. The Ton watched them all. And then the whispers began. "Did you see?" hissed Lady Cooper to the Duchess of Rutland, their parasols tilted together like conspirators. "She touched him. A complete stranger. In the mud. Her mother must be absolutely mortified," supplied the Duchess helpfully. "Apoplectic," corrected Lady Cooper. "Mark my words, Selene Ashworth will not recover from this. A lady's reputation is not a lavender gown, your grace. One cannot simply wash the stain away." And so, dear reader, the verdict was rendered before Lady Selene had even returned to the path. By the time she reached her carriage, the story had been told, embellished, and codified. By luncheon, it had been decided. Lady Selene Ashworth had debased herself for a vagabond. By tea, the vagabond had been variously identified as a foreign sailor, a disgraced officer, and, in one particularly creative iteration from Mrs. Featherington, a traveling circus performer of dubious origin. The truth, of course, was far more interesting. But then, dear reader, the truth so often is. The Montclair Ball is, by universal agreement, the event of the early season. Not because the Montclairs are the wealthiest family in London, they are not, though they would be grievously offended to hear it, but because Lady Montclair possesses two qualities essential to a successful hostess: an unerring instinct for spectacle and a complete absence of mercy. Her ballroom was legendary. 3 stories of honey-colored stone, its ceiling painted with a scene of Apollo driving his chariot across a sky rendered in such vivid gold and cerulean that one almost forgot one was standing in Grosvenor Square, and not upon Olympus itself. 12 crystal chandeliers, imported, Lady Montclair never tired of mentioning, from Venice, hung like frozen waterfalls, their 1,000 candles casting a light that was less illumination than alchemy, turning everything and everyone beneath them to gold. The walls were lined with mirrors, also Venetian, also mentioned, that multiplied the crowd into an army of silk and satin, diamonds and ostrich plumes, creating the illusion that the whole of London society had been gathered, reflected, and placed on display for the amusement of the gods painted overhead. The air was thick with beeswax and bergamot, with the clashing perfumes of 200 guests, rosewater warring with ambergris, jasmine skirmishing with sandalwood, and beneath it all, the warm animal scent of bodies pressed close in the service of social ambition. An orchestra, half hidden behind a bower of white roses, played a minuet with the mechanical precision of musicians who have been threatened with dismissal should they deviate by so much as a semiquaver from Lady Montclair's approved program. Into this glittering crucible stepped Lady Selene Ashworth, and if she felt the weight of every eye in the room turning upon her like the brass lenses of 100 telescopes, she did not show it. She was a vision. This author does not use the word lightly, for visions are the currency of romance novels, and ideal in the harder tender of truth. But truth compels me to report that when Lady Selene descended the curved marble staircase into the Montclair ballroom, the minuet faltered. Not stopped, the musicians were far too terrified of Lady Montclair for that, but faltered as though even the violins needed a moment to collect themselves. Her gown was silk, the color of midnight, not the pale, timid midnight of watercolor paintings, but the true, absolute dark of a sky untroubled by moon or stars. Against this darkness her skin blazed. There is no other word for it. The deep mahogany brown of her bare shoulders, her collarbones, the slender column of her neck, all seemed to emit their own light, as though the warmth that resided in her character had found its way to the surface and was radiating outward for all to see. The gown's bodice was fitted close, embroidered with tiny crystals that caught the candlelight and scattered it in points of white fire, so that she appeared to be wearing the night sky itself. At her throat a single sapphire, deep blue nearly black, hung from a chain of white gold, resting in the hollow between her collarbones like a secret. Her hair was sculpted into an arrangement of breathtaking complexity. A high crown of braids, each one woven with gold thread, cascading at the back into a series of loops and twists that defied both gravity and comprehension, secured with pins tipped with tiny diamonds that trembled with every movement of her head like dew on a spider's web at dawn. She wore no other jewelry. She needed none. She was her own adornment. "Courage," murmured Dorothea from behind her, where she had stationed herself with the other ladies' maids in the antechamber. It was for Dorothea practically a soliloquy of emotional support. Lady Selene descended. The whispers rose to meet her like a tide. "There she is, the Samaritan of Hyde Park." This from Miss Cressida Blackwood, whose beauty was of the cold, precise variety, skin of deep bronze, features as perfectly proportioned as a mathematical proof, and a heart that operated with similar clinical detachment. She stood with her coterie of admirers like a queen holding court, her gown of emerald silk making her look every inch the serpent she aspired to be. "Tell me, Lady Selene, have you brought your muddy friend this evening? I am sure Lady Montclair could find a place for him, perhaps in the stables." The laughter that followed was sharp and bright and cruel, the laughter of people who have confused wit with malice and mistake cruelty for cleverness. Lady Selene paused at the foot of the staircase. She turned to Miss Blackwood with the composed expression of a woman who has heard worse from better and found both wanting. "I confess, Miss Blackwood," she said, her voice carrying with the effortless clarity of good breeding and better enunciation, "that I have always found it curious how some in our society can identify the cost of a man's coat at 30 paces but cannot recognize his humanity at 3. It is a peculiar blindness, is it not? One wonders what the optician might prescribe." A ripple of something, not quite laughter, not quite approval, but the dangerous frisson of a crowd sensing blood, moved through the ballroom. Miss Blackwood's smile hardened. "Humanity," she repeated, as though tasting the word and finding it provincial. "How very pastoral of you." "Pastoral implies simplicity," Lady Selene replied. "What I describe is merely civilized. I understand the confusion." She turned away before Miss Blackwood could respond, which was, in the grammar of social warfare, the equivalent of a decisive flanking maneuver. She moved into the crowd with her head high and her back straight and her midnight gown trailing behind her like the wake of a ship sailing into hostile waters. The evening progressed in the manner of all such evenings. Dances were danced, refreshments were consumed, alliances were forged and betrayed over glasses of champagne, and at least 3 mammas maneuvered their daughters into the path of the Duke of Hartfield with the tactical precision of field marshals. Lady Selene danced twice, once with Lord Pemberton, who was her cousin and therefore safe, and once with Sir Reginald Hale, who was 73 and therefore also safe, though for different reasons. She was not asked again. The mud of Hyde Park, it seemed, had not merely stained her hem. It had rendered her untouchable. She stood near the terrace doors, watching the dancers with an expression that a less observant commentator might have called serene. But this author is not less observant, and what I saw in Lady Selene's face as she stood alone at the edge of that glittering room was something far more complex. The particular, quiet dignity of a woman who has chosen to be herself and is paying the price, and who has examined the invoice and decided, with clear eyes, that the cost is one she is willing to bear. It was at precisely 23 minutes past 10 o'clock. I note the time because precision is the hallmark of good reporting, and because what happened next requires no embellishment whatsoever, that the doors at the top of the staircase opened. The butler, Mr. Hargrove, a man whose vocal cords appeared to have been tuned by the same craftsman responsible for Lady Montclair's Venetian chandeliers, drew a breath that seemed to fill the entire room. The Right Honourable Edmund Blackwell, Viscount Thorne. Dear reader, there are entrances and then there are entrances. The Prince Regent himself might enter a room and command attention through the sheer gravitational force of his title and his waistline. A celebrated beauty might descend a staircase and draw every eye through the ancient magnetism of form and silk. But what happened when the Viscount Thorne appeared at the top of the Montclair staircase was something else entirely. It was the entrance of a truth into a room full of comfortable fictions, and comfortable fictions, as we all know, do not take kindly to being disturbed. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and it was, I suspect, a calculated moment, for the Viscount was many things, but unstrategic was not among them. The candlelight found him and held him, as though even the flames recognized authority. He was resplendent. The mud was gone, naturally, replaced by evening dress of such impeccable severity that it bordered on a statement. Black coat, black waistcoat, white cravat tied in the mathematical. A knot so precise and so fiendishly difficult that it was said only 3 men in England could achieve it, and 2 of them were valets. His skin, that deep lustrous umber that the morning's mud had obscured, now caught the light of 12 Venetian chandeliers and returned it with interest, as though he were carved from some precious dark wood and then polished to a shine that put the silverware to shame. His hair was cropped close, a crown of tight curls that emphasized the strong architecture of his skull, the powerful line of his jaw, the high forehead that spoke of both intelligence and authority. At his cravat a single pin, a ruby red as arterial blood set in gold. He descended the staircase with the unhurried confidence of a man who knows that the room will wait for him, because the room always waits. And then the recognition began, spreading through the ballroom like fire through dry grass. "Thorne," whispered Lord Ashford, the blood draining from his face with such rapidity that his carefully cultivated tan appeared to be fleeing the premises. "That was in the park, good God, that was." "The Viscount," finished Mr. Finch-Hatton, who had gone the color of curdled milk. "We laughed at the Viscount Thorne." The Honorable George Crawley said nothing at all, which was for him an unprecedented display of wisdom. For those unfamiliar with the name, and there were few in that room who were, though many had never laid eyes upon the man himself, allow this author to illuminate. Edmund Blackwell, the 5th Viscount Thorne, was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in England. His estates in Northumberland were vast, his investments in the East India Company were legendary, and his influence in Parliament was the sort that operated not through speeches and votes but through quiet words in quiet rooms that somehow resulted in very loud outcomes. He had been abroad for 3 years, the West Indies it was whispered, or perhaps the Continent, or possibly both, and his absence from London society had done nothing to diminish his reputation. If anything, it had enhanced it, for there is nothing the tongue loves more than a mystery, particularly when the mystery is wealthy, titled, and unmarried. He was also, as every person in that ballroom now realized with the dawning horror of a collective social catastrophe, the man who had fallen in the mud of Hyde Park that very morning. The man they had stepped around, laughed at, and left to the mercy of the dirt. The man Lady Selene had helped to his feet. The Viscount reached the bottom of the staircase. Lady Montclair surged forward, her face arranged in an expression of such welcoming delight that one might have thought she had personally penned the invitation, rather than, as this author happens to know, having added his name to the guest list in a frantic scrawl approximately 45 minutes earlier, upon receiving intelligence of his return to London. "Lord Thorne," she exclaimed, "what an absolute honor! We had no idea you were returned to us. London has been simply bereft. Lady Montclair." His bow was correct, his smile polite, and his attention already elsewhere. He was scanning the room. Every debutante straightened. Every mamma drew a sharp breath. Every matchmaking eye in the room narrowed to a predatory focus. The Viscount Thorne, unmarried, unfathomably wealthy, and devastatingly handsome, was looking for someone. Miss Blackwood moved forward, her emerald gown catching the light as she positioned herself directly in his line of sight. Her smile was radiant. Her curtsy was perfection. Her strategy was transparent. He was also, as every person in that ballroom now realized with the dawning horror of a collective social catastrophe, the man who had fallen in the mud of Hyde Park that very morning. The man they had stepped around, laughed at, and left to the mercy of the dirt. The man Lady Selene had helped to his feet. The Viscount reached the bottom of the staircase. Lady Montclair surged forward, her face arranged in an expression of such welcoming delight that one might have thought she had personally penned the invitation, rather than, as this author happens to know, having added his name to the guest list in a frantic scrawl approximately 45 minutes earlier, upon receiving intelligence of his return to London. "Lord Thorne," she exclaimed, "what an absolute honor! We had no idea you were returned to us. London has been simply bereft. Lady Montclair." His bow was correct, his smile polite, and his attention already elsewhere. He was scanning the room. Every debutante straightened. Every mama drew a sharp breath. Every matchmaking eye in the room narrowed to a predatory focus. The Viscount Thorne, unmarried, unfathomably wealthy, and devastatingly handsome, was looking for someone. Miss Blackwood moved forward, her emerald gown catching the light as she positioned herself directly in his line of sight. Her smile was radiant. Her curtsy was perfection. Her strategy was transparent. The Viscount Thorne, fifth of his name, master of Thornfield Park, one of the most powerful men in England, did something that no one in that room, not Lady Montclair, not the gossiping mamas, not the sneering young bucks, and certainly not Miss Cressida Blackwood, had anticipated. He knelt. Not a bow. Not a half bend of the knee that might be mistaken for a stumble or a stretch. A full, deliberate, unmistakable genuflection, one knee upon the polished marble floor of the Montclair ballroom. His dark eyes lifted to Lady Selene's face with an expression that contained, in its depths, the weight of genuine reverence. "My lady," he said, and his voice, that deep, travel-roughened voice, carried to every corner of the silent room. "This morning, in a park full of people who pride themselves on their refinement, their breeding, and their impeccable manners, I found myself in the dirt. Not one soul among them, not one lord, not one lady, not one paragon of this great and glittering society, saw fit to offer a hand. They saw mud and they recoiled. They saw a stranger without a title on display, and they laughed." He paused. The silence was so complete that one could hear the candles flickering in their crystal prisons overhead. "But you," he continued, "you stepped off the path. You ruined your gown. You took the hand of a man you did not know, whose name you had not heard, whose worth you could not measure by any of the yardsticks this society holds dear. And you did it not for advantage, not for display, but because—" He stopped. Something moved in his face. A crack in the composure. A flash of emotion so raw that even this seasoned observer felt the need to look away. "Because it was right," he finished quietly. "Because you are the kind of person who does what is right, even when the world is watching and laughing. Especially then." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small object. A handkerchief. It was fine linen, edged in lace, and embroidered in one corner with a crest. The thorn crest, a stag rampant beneath a crown of thorns, worked in gold thread. It was, Lady Selene realized, the handkerchief she had pressed into his hand that morning, after he had risen, to clean the mud from his face. She had not asked for it back. She had not expected to see it again. "You gave me this," he said, holding it out. "In kindness, without thought of return. I am here to return it, and to tell you before this room and every soul in it, that I have traveled 3 continents and 10,000 miles, and I have never encountered a grace to match yours." The silence held for 1 heartbeat, 2, 3, and then Lady Selene, who had endured the whispers and the snickers and the cold shoulders and the pointed exclusions of an entire day and an entire society, did something that was so perfectly, quintessentially herself that this author's pen trembles in recording it. She smiled. Not a triumphant smile. Not a vindicated one. Not the sharp, satisfied smile of a woman who has been proved right and wishes to ensure that everyone knows it. No. It was a warm smile. A generous smile. The smile of a woman who has been seen, truly seen, and finds in that recognition, not victory but connection. "You owe me nothing, my lord," she said. echoing her words from the morning. "But I thank you for the return of my handkerchief. It was my favorite." A laugh escaped him, surprised, genuine, and so warmly human that several nearby matrons clutched their fans to their bosoms as though physically struck by charm. "Then may I ask," he said, rising to his feet with the fluid grace of a man who kneels only when he means it, "if the owner of my favorite handkerchief would do me the honor of the next dance?" She placed her hand in his. Their fingers interlocked, dark skin against darker, her slender elegance against his broad strength, and the image was so striking, so perfectly composed, that this author half expected the painted Apollo on the ceiling to stop his chariot and applaud. The orchestra, catching Lady Montclair's frantic signal from across the room, launched into a waltz. Not the minuet that had been next on the program. A waltz. Because Lady Montclair, whatever her faults, understood spectacle, and she understood that this moment, this unprecedented, unscripted, magnificent moment, deserved nothing less than three-quarter time and the freedom of an embrace. They danced. And, dear reader, the room watched. Not with the sharp, predatory attention of gossips cataloging missteps, but with something older and less easily dismissed. They watched the way his hand rested at her waist, as though it had been designed to fit there. They watched the way she looked up at him, not with the calculated coyness of a debutante, but with the open, fearless gaze of a woman who has nothing to hide and nothing to prove. They watched the candlelight play upon two figures moving in perfect, inevitable harmony, dark silk and darker skin turning together beneath a painted heaven. They watched, and some of them, the honest ones, the ones who still remembered what it felt like before they traded their hearts for invitations, felt something stir in the region of their chests. Something inconvenient. Something dangerously close to shame. By the time the waltz ended and Lord Thorne led Lady Selene to the refreshment table, keeping her hand in his, a gesture of possession so subtle and so public that every mamma in the room simultaneously recalculated her daughter's prospects. The social order of the season had been rewritten. Lord Ashford, Mr. Finchhatton, and the Honourable George Crawley had developed a sudden and urgent interest in the terrace, where they remained for the rest of the evening, presumably reflecting upon the unforeseen consequences of laughing at strangers in parks. Miss Blackwood had developed a headache and retired. Lady Cooper had discovered a newfound admiration for Lady Selene's remarkable composure, and the Duchess of Rutland had been overheard telling Lady Montclair that she had always said that Selene Ashworth was the finest young woman in London, a statement that bore no relationship whatsoever to anything she had ever previously said, but which was delivered with such conviction that even she may have believed. A week has passed since the Montclair Ball, and London continues to talk. This, of course, is what London does best. It talks and talks and talks, until the words wear grooves in the air and the story becomes legend. But the story they are telling now is not the story they told on Tuesday afternoon. The tale of Lady Selene's disgrace in Hyde Park has been quietly, thoroughly, and entirely replaced by the tale of her triumph. The Tun, that great and fickle beast, has turned its massive head, blinked its collective eye, and decided, with the same supreme confidence with which it had condemned her, that Lady Selene Ashworth is in fact the heroine of the season. I am told that the Viscount Thorne has called upon Pemberton House every day this week. I am told that he has been seen driving Lady Selene in the park, in the very park where she muddied her hem and her reputation, in a phaeton so new that the paint still gleams. I am told that he sent her sapphires. I am told that he sent her books. I am told, and this, dear reader, is the detail that interests me most, that he sent her a handkerchief newly monogrammed, bearing not the Thorne stag alone but a second crest beside it, the Pemberton Rose. An optimist might call it a courtship gift. A cynic might call it a statement of intent. This author calls it what it is: a promise stitched in silk that the woman who reached into the mud for a stranger has found, in that stranger, someone who will spend the rest of his days ensuring that she never stands alone at the edge of a ballroom again. As for the rest of the ton, those who laughed, those who whispered, those who turned away, I offer only this observation. Kindness, dear reader, is the rarest jewel in all of London, rarer than the Montclair diamonds, rarer than a genuine compliment at Almack's. And the most extraordinary thing about it is this: it costs nothing, and yet so few can afford it. Let us hope that Lady Selene's example proves instructive, though, knowing the ton as I do, I rather suspect they will require several more lessons before the message takes hold. Until then, I remain as ever your faithful servant and most devoted observer of the beautiful, the scandalous, and the occasionally unexpectedly good.